Recording. All right. Well, good evening, graduate UNSY students. First, as a reminder, I am recording this session, and a copy is going to be made available for those who are unable to attend tonight. Next, for the format of our meeting, I'm going to start by introducing our guest, and then we're going to proceed into a Q&A discussion. Afterwards, I'm going to open up the session to a class-wide Q&A. In the meantime, I do ask that you all mute your mics, save any questions to the end, and use the hand raise icon to indicate when you do have a question so I can call on each of you in order. And alternatively, you can drop your question over into the chat. It just may not be prioritized as much as the folks who are going to engage with the audio. And with that, I am just really thrilled to welcome you to the 39th session of the UNSY Guest SME Speaker Series. This is the third and final for the October term. I'm Dr. Brent Terwilliger, the program coordinator for the Master of Science in Uncrewed and Autonomous Systems degree here at Embry-Riddle Worldwide. Tonight, we are joined by our guest subject matter expert, Dan Sloat, the founder of the Advanced Air Mobility Institute. The AAM Institute is a 501c3 nonprofit research center that's dedicated to educating and advocating for the broadest public benefit through the aviation ecosystem. Dan is a global top 100 AAM industry leader, according to eVTOL Insights Power Book. As the incoming president of Electro Aero, he's championing international development of reliable electric aviation charging networks. Dan was also a featured keynote speaker at the inaugural AAM Symposium that was hosted by the United Nations Aviation Agency, ICAO. Previously, he served as the CEO for an American vertiport company. For some additional background, he was a U.S. Air Force captain and was awarded a Humanitarian Service Medal for his efforts to aid refugees in Syria. After his military commitment, he earned a master's in economics, a master's in business administration, and a Juris Doctorate. Dan is an adjunct professor of advanced air mobility at the University of Arkansas, a member of the Royal Aeronautical Society, and he also sits on the World Economic Forum Aviate Committee to advise on the future of autonomous flight. With that, let's give a warm welcome to Dan. I'm really excited to explore this space together over the course of our unfolding discussion.
Thank you, Brent.
So I'd like to lead us into maybe just some questions regarding general understanding and some of the future directions that we're headed with advanced air mobility. If you wouldn't mind, what's your vision for AAM? How does it maybe differ from traditional aviation and some of the previous classifications like urban air mobility?
Yes. So, in this space, Brent, I'll start by saying I've been looking forward to what's now known as advanced air mobility as far back as 2010. During my time on active duty, supporting along with our mutual colleague, Ryan Wallace, who's also a professor at Embry-Riddle. We were engaged, of course, in Operation Enduring Freedom, and my individual role was orchestrating the safe and efficient navigation of really at any given point in time at least 100, and over the duration as many as 13,000 drones, and that's across all the U.S. branches and our coalition allies. And I could see, in all of its complexity, just how powerful these tools can be. And of course, they're operating at all altitudes, including altitudes that we can't talk about in this forum. But it's a very dynamic environment, and I felt that if we can adapt this technology for civilian use, and in particular get it in the hands of first responders stateside, then we can do an awful lot of good in the world. And so after 6 years on active duty, so this would have been 2015 when I finished up. The Uber Elevate white paper had not been published yet. So it still felt very that there was still a lot of maturing for the industry to go through. So I decided to go back to school. As you shared, I studied economics, business, as well as law. But there was always a look towards emerging aviation technology. And in many ways, the reason that we started up the Advanced Air Mobility Institute was to try to help illuminate for people that there's so much more to this advanced air mobility space than simply eVTOLs engaging in the particular use case of air taxi, right? Helping high net worth individuals, save a bit of time. Um, by all means, I'm confident that that is a viable market moving forward. And that really is the core of urban air mobility. But this kind of broader umbrella of advanced air mobility, inclusive of UAM, RAM, regional air mobility, as well as a relatively recent development, what's being referred to as IAM, international air mobility. And I'll just quickly say IAM, it has less to do with necessarily the capabilities of the aircraft and more about the legal implications, right? Because of course, as soon as you're crossing international borders, then our international customary law and, for example, Chicago Convention, those do start to come into effect. So we still see to this day at conferences and trade shows around the world some confusion that perhaps urban air mobility and advanced air mobility are simply two names for the same thing. But perhaps an easy way to think about it, let's say that urban air mobility is if urban air mobility is Congress, then advanced air mobility is the entire federal government. There's certainly much more because it does include, of course, uncrewed aero systems. It also includes other forms of sustainable propulsion, right? Hydrogen fuel, for example. We're also very supportive of bridge technologies like hybrid electric. So there's an awful lot to advanced air mobility, and it is frankly, I just think this is a very exciting time to be in the aviation space. And I would say generally, as it differs from broader aviation, there's really kind of this renaissance of creativity, really kind of focused in on what the eventual use case will be. My impression's been that for quite a long time we've looked at very modest incremental changes and updates to airframes. Honestly, that's probably driven quite a bit by the regulatory scheme. That if we're going to invest time in some new component, we're going to want to see a return on investment. So it's got to be commissioned and type certified and actually put into operation before we have any chance of commercializing. So part of what I like and I find so ambitious about advanced air mobility is that we have a number of OEMs that are just completely clean sheet, right, from scratch. No major vendors or suppliers contributing that perhaps would give the FAA, EASA, and all the other regulators a bit more comfort in moving forward with those. So no, this is it's a really exciting space, and very much appreciate the invitation to join you all tonight.
So you kind of alluded to that, yeah, that crawl, walk, run philosophy that we've seen in practice now. I've been a part of just the general UAS space as an academic since 2012, and when the rules first started kind of getting pushed, there was a lot of chafing at it because people, honestly, they lost ability. Previous, they could just take a RC aircraft out and put some sensors on it and go fly. And then everybody was kind of shut down and said, okay, now you need a CUA, you need, the evolving rule set. And we've gotten to the point now where we're maybe a year to 18 months from BV loss rules being possibly out there and available for everybody. So this this philosophy, I think it does work. We do see the benefit of it, and I think some of the research that you mentioned, Dr. Wallace, and something I'm working on with him is talking about the observations from the field of tracking these aircraft that are out there to determine what does the large composite in the NAS, the National Airspace System, look like. Um, you mentioned first responders, air taxis, UAS, some power storage technologies, and aviation aerospace airframe manufacturers. What other industries or sectors do you think are going to tie in and benefit from AAM, and how do you see maybe its adoption evolving within these communities over the next 10-year period?
Yeah, excellent question, Brent. You know, when we think about just the full spectrum of industries and sectors that could potentially benefit, no question about it, the supply chain logistics sector stands to gain quite a bit, especially, as you alluded to. Latest I heard for BV loss that there will be a notice for proposed rulemaking coming out relatively soon, which
Yep.
is exciting to see. I think there's a number of my industry colleagues are pushing particularly hard that be released prior to the change in executive administration. Um, and that's important to consider, that when we have administration changes, if it's not necessarily top of mind, if it's not a priority um, for the next president, then these things can be kind of pushed to the wayside. So hopefully, we continue to see a measure of bipartisan support. um, but in addition to supply chain logistics, we think that there's an awful lot of um, potential when it comes to critical infrastructure inspection, use of shielded operations, right, uncrewed aerial systems flying in close proximity to railways, bridges, power lines, um, all of these, all of the physical infrastructure that, of course, aviation has historically had to avoid by quite a distance anyway. I think that's a pretty clever approach, and there's actually some interesting research that's going into um, looking at the potential here beyond simply what we traditionally consider public safety and the direct life-saving capacity, right, from wildfires, natural disasters, and so forth, but actually digging a bit deeper and looking at just how many um, field technician roles that face quite a bit of, frankly, unnecessary risk. Right, if you're inspecting power lines, for example, you've got the risk of falling from the cherry picker if there's any kind of issue with your harness, and of course the inherent risk of dealing with high powered electricity. Um, and it's a case where we can do these same kind of inspections faster, cheaper, more with much more robust efficacy, So we very much advocate for those uses in advanced air mobility as well. Um, one of the research projects that we're working on is a bit interesting, trying to study its potential to combat food deserts. Um, Still a relatively new concept, a food desert being an otherwise, pretty dense urban area in which it is prohibitively far to, healthy food options. There's a high proportion of the U.S. population that, sure, they have plenty of options when it comes to fast food, but when we're talking about fresh produce, if they don't own a car, then their access to lettuce and apples and carrots and so forth is pretty limited. And we're seeing that has follow-on effects to how the children in these households are able to get the necessary nutrition, and then the follow on, to pay attention in class, to get high marks, and join the ranks, maybe one day attend Embry-Riddle themselves because, they've developed a passion in aviation. And so through the use of uncrewed aero systems, perhaps especially ones with, further extent of automation, we can actually reduce the overall cost, both in money and time, to get fresh produce to communities like that. And those are precisely the kind of use cases that benefit those underserved neighborhoods, and I think that will make an incredible impact on our efforts for public acceptance.
Excellent. Yeah, it's exciting to hear those innovations that are occurring and the things that spark where folks maybe envision or ideas that they can come up with for new use cases. I'd like to switch gears a little bit and maybe talk about some of the influencing factors that are guiding where we're headed with this. Because to be honest, a few years ago, I think just pre-COVID, I was involved in just some of the early review of at the time, it was the urban air mobility CONOPS that was pushed. It was developed by uh, NASA with the FAA and Deloitte. I was part of the team that came into LA and then into Virginia to provide some review and discussion on it. And we had a pretty good picture of where we thought this was headed. And I think in the last 4.5 years, it's shifted gears a little bit, but we've also seen some major momentum and movement. So on that, I'd like to kind of tap your economic background and get your thoughts on this. We've been seeing an increasing number of platforms come to maturation with strong investment from larger firms, groups like Joby and Archer. Uh, there's been investment in them by external firms. But we've also seen groups like Lilium, they've run into financial challenges. What are some of the major fiscal or economic challenges that are happening in this space?
Yes, there's certainly quite a few financial challenges. Lilium's facing quite a bit of that at the moment with undergoing administration. With their they declared insolvency over in Germany, and there was a period where kind of the thought leaders, if you will, in this space, were pretty well convinced that if you had raised $1 billion, then you probably could reach type certification. I think that's really starting to come into question lately. Um, and of course, it's not enough to raise any amount of money. You have to be responsible with it. Um, and the effort to continue to raise to attract more and more investment dollars um, is to an extent at odds with completely candid, full disclosure, transparent, technological progress updates. Um, and that's pretty foreseeable. Of course, um, I'm not close enough to Lilium to know any insider information, but I have heard, among their investors, concerns about, did some of rather ambitious claims to investors, did they at any point kind of flirt with or possibly even cross over into line what might be considered in a legal sense fraud? Um, Certainly hope that that's not the case. That would be quite a black eye, if you will, on the industry overall. But it does speak to, right? I mean, in when it comes to entrepreneurship and the startup world, the fight to attract those limited investor dollars, um, it is a real challenge. Um, Joby, on the other hand, they've raised now $2.6 billion, nearly $1 billion from Toyota alone. Which has been exciting to see. And latest I read that they're planning to go seek yet another 300 million. Right. So if they're pushing three, and if they prove to be one of the few to get type certified, um, I have to imagine that may be a case where we'll see accelerating consolidation. At one point in time, we saw as many as 800 different just eVTOL designs actively under development. Um, Even I don't think we're at the stage where we could possibly, that the industry could support anywhere as many as 800 different OEMs. Um, maybe 1% of that,
Yep.
right? But from an economic standpoint, and I do want to again reiterate, air taxi, I think, does have a compelling business model behind it. Right? I mean, you're helping high net worth individuals, save, upwards of 3 to 4 times their, whatever that commute is. But it's
Well, and I will say
nonetheless.
I want to interrupt on that one because we've had some guests in the past from the Fed come in, and one of the things they view AAM as was it's an equalizing agent,
Mm,
meaning they want to build the system not necessarily for those who are affluent,
mhm.
but for the entire population. Because and that's where the Fed dollars get invested, is to kind of pay back for the everybody's investment in that. And that came to us through oh gosh, Saracena Tukin from the DOT HAS Center of Excellence. So she shared that view that this technology, um, they're going in looking at how do we make this equitable? How do we make this accessible by the population that's ultimately going to fund it from taxes and
Right.
investment in that perspective. But I do get it, the enterprise aspect of it, the entrepreneurial component. You're gonna have to make that economic sense with very dense operations initially, very limited. So that does have to come in through the folks who are willing to pay the higher dollar value at the onset.
Sure, sure. Well, and I 1,000% agree. And again, that was the real catalyst behind why we launched the AM Institute, is to say, hey, listen, if all we're doing is helping rich people skid up on traffic, then, not only are we going to lose, any hope at broad public acceptance, I think we're going to lose a lot of the talented workforce, right? I mean, I have to imagine, right? Some folks are saying, hey, if the salary is good, I'll stick around. But I'm confident that more and more people, and I think we're seeing this with the younger generation, they want to be proud of the work that they're doing, and so that's why we, for example, at the AM Institute, public safety is such a core focus of ours, but we also look to advocate for a number of other underserved communities, to include those with limited physical mobility, right? I mean, I think it's only natural. Advanced air mobility supports individuals with limited physical mobility. You're probably familiar, Brent, with this concept of like a silver economy, because we don't necessarily need people who are ridiculously wealthy. They just need to have enough to cover, right, the flights, have a a real need to cover that distance, and of course the time to invest in that transportation with some kind of regularity. And so I think there's a lot of reason to believe that, for example, situating vertiports in a convenient location in a retirement community, to help retired folks make more frequent visits to grandchildren, or to a city center to enjoy the symphony. Um, they're they don't, at an advanced age, perhaps driving would be unsafe. But they shouldn't have to wait. They shouldn't have to just count the hours and hope that their children bring those grandkids at a time that's convenient for them. So I think that's got a lot of potential. We're also doing a lot of advocacy to try to support individuals on the spectrum. And part of what's interesting about that is, of course, we'll always advocate as passengers, but there's growing research that shows individuals on the spectrum may actually be just as and in some cases more competent, more capable as UAS operators, than what we would consider normal. Um, uh,
Neurotypical. Yeah.
exactly, neurotypical.
It's that hyper focus and attention to detail in the things that are um, that are being focused on. So
And
I
the
could see that.
geospatial reasoning is fantastic. Yeah.
Let me ask, you talked about some advocacy. How is the public perception of safety, noise, environmental impact? How's that influencing the pace of AM implementation? And what does outreach engagement and even education look like in this space for that?
So first, I'll give a shout out to one of our programming partners over in the UK, known as Flight Crowd. The founder there, Maria, got loads of respect for her. She's dedicated, an immense amount of time and energy into doing her part to try to inspire, young students to learn about this space and consider entering it themselves. Um, there's quite a lack of public awareness. So the way we look at it, public acceptance is, we're not even necessarily to that stage to really start making an impact on that front. But when it comes to noise, there is kind of a fascinating element here that I honestly don't think I'm seeing this comment from Seth. Everyone's a stakeholder. I absolutely agree.
We'll get to those, I
We'll get
promise.
to those. Yeah. Um, but I honestly don't think that it's enough to simply speak in decibels. Right. The measured volume of noise. Um, you know, for example, a community that's able to enjoy, relative peace and quiet in their garden, that doesn't have, helicopter flights overhead with any kind of regularity. Um, the thing about noise is when you're used to silence, any amount can be very frustrating and disconcerting. Right, and lead to backlash. That idea of NIMBYism, not in my backyard, quite literally. Um, and so there's I there are a number of details I can't share, so I'll keep this a bit more generic. But there's a project that we are exploring to actually repurpose what has effectively become a true downtown commercial airport um, and into a UAM vertiport. And I think that has quite a bit of promise because, of course, the local population has been growing, more and more frustrated with, a traditional airport creates an incredible amount of noise pollution, light pollution, and of course, air pollution. Um, and if if we're honest, the this is pretty universal. You meet just about anyone on the planet, and if what you come to know about them is that they live right outside the fence line of a major international airport, it most certainly is not because they're a very avid traveler. Those communities experience the brunt of the negative externalities, and and so you can conclude that they live there quite literally because they couldn't afford to live anywhere else. And so for a community like that where it's repurposed for vertiports, and now we're using zero emission aircraft with lower decibel output. Um, they will have the immediate knowledge and memory of what's lately I heard the term vintage aviation, which is a bit tongue in cheek. Our liaison to Finland coined that. But at any rate, with the immediate memory of just how frustrating living just outside the fence line of traditional airport can be, um, compared to a vertiport, I think has a lot of potential. I think we'll win a lot of hearts and minds where people say, okay, like, do I notice these eVTOLs and uncrewed aerial systems? Absolutely. But I can compare head to head just how much nicer and less of a detriment to my day-to-day life this has been. Um, and they over time they would almost certainly see lower amounts of smog, for example.
Okay. I see a lot of questions building in our chat, so I'm going to kind of cut down some of mine so we can get to those a little sooner. But I do have a couple that I think they're areas I'd like to make sure we cover.
Yeah.
Um, Something that's really growing in prominence and visibility, AI technology. I know we host a stakeholder advisory group, and it's one of the things that they have really put an emphasis on. Is this is something universities and colleges really need to get ahead of. They need to understand the utility, as well as some of the holdbacks and some of the drawbacks of this capability. But in that, what roles do you see AI or machine learning supporting within the AM space? How do you potentially see it maybe transform or adapt what we currently do within aviation operations, from maybe autonomous pilotage to traffic management? Where are the different aspects you see it plugging in?
Well, so on the traffic management side, of course, that's near and dear to my heart. Coming from the Air Force, um, I do think that overseeing about 100 at any given point in time really did feel like at max capacity. I think if we push it much further than that, we may actually see some, close calls and safety implications. Um, and while I'm quite bullish on AI and machine learning's capabilities on that front, there's actually a parallel development on the computing side. You're probably familiar, Brent, with quantum computing. Um, I think that if we're really going to scale advanced air mobility operations, um, into something that becomes ubiquitous, that is at the scale where it becomes affordable to your average citizen. We really will need to leverage developments like quantum computing. Um, I'll give a shout out to my colleagues at Flyvy Bird. They've developed an AI model that aggregates, actually from a multimodal perspective, that is inclusive of advanced air mobility platforms, electric aircraft that are just on the horizon. And their approach is to say, generally speaking, a person's trying to get from A to B. That same person, depending on the surrounding circumstance, there are going to be times where they want to prioritize time, right? What's going to get me there fastest, and I'm actually pretty agnostic to the medium of transport. I don't so much care if it's on a railway, aircraft, car, etc. Or other times, maybe I'm not so much in a rush, and um, I want to optimize the cost, right? I don't mind if it takes me a little bit longer. I'd like to save a bit of money. And then other times, you're likely to seek to optimize the carbon emissions, right? And you say, okay, it's somewhere in between. And I want to do my part. I don't mind if I pay a premium. I don't mind if I experience some delays, but I'd like to try to be conscientious in that way. And so that's another cool use of AI that's not, directly in the operations of the aircraft. Um, but I will say that often in these conversations, when people bring up like, well, hey, listen, on takeoff and landing, there's already an exceptional amount of automation that takes place. Personally, I don't. It's kind of like pulling the curtain back, right? My sense is that most people probably would rather not know how automated those portions are already, that we're not necessarily going to win people over. If anything, we might scare them a bit for, commercial jet operations today. Um, but um, but we do need to be careful as we introduce more and more automation, that number one, that we do not make the shift to fully automated before we prove without a shadow of a doubt that such an algorithm truly is better than even our best pilot available, right? In the interest of safety, because they're not perfect, right?
We have to
Um,
build that trust in the system through exhibited demonstrated reliability. I completely concur with that.
exactly right. Yeah, and then the next element to that is having an eye towards the human factors, right? That so long as there is a pilot in the flight deck, that we also be careful that in a sense that we don't lull them into boredom, right? That there's still enough engagement, that they don't get sidetracked, certainly that they don't fall asleep, right? Because if it's too automated too quickly, um you know, it almost becomes a point where it could be more dangerous that there's a pilot because there's an expectation that they will step in, they will intervene. But pretty quickly, if you're not tracking, you don't have the wherewithal that a dangerous situation is developing, then really no one knows to intervene.
That's why you still have to monitor and supervise the system. Otherwise, you're going to get pulled out of, a situation, where you run into attentional allocation issues. You're probably focused on some other high priority task. Now you're going to get immediately pulled over to this other high priority emergency that you have no context to understand. So you somehow have to get up to speed. Your essay of the situation needs to come up to an equivalent level, and it's in that transition where problems happen. So yeah,
Exactly.
that's why supervision is so important. But it, as you mentioned, you run the risk of the very reasons we use UAS in many cases, dull and
Yeah,
repetitive tasking. So
exactly.
all right, I'd like to switch over to just a couple professional development practice questions, and then I'm going to open it up to the class here.
Sure.
Um, so you're very engaged in this material, this topic. You must spend a lot of time, looking at materials, bleeding edge materials that are coming out. What tools, mechanisms, sources do you use to stay up to date in this space? And maybe what are some strategies that you like to employ just to sift through probably the huge volume of material that comes in on a daily basis?
Yes, yes. Well, um, you know, probably the most at the most basic level. Certainly, anyone who wants to follow, the developing trends, really of any industry or technology. Certainly, smart to to establish some of these Google search alerts, right? Instead of you going in, at a certain time of day and typing it in. That's certainly been helpful to try to keep pace. Um, there are a number of industry um, media outlets. For example, eVTOL Insights covers quite a few of the updates. Urban Air Mobility News is another great resource. Advanced Air Mobility International. Um, I in terms of deep dive insights, I'll have to give a shout out to reporter Elon Head and the team at Air Current. um, Now that is behind his paywall, but I think they do a fantastic job of looking beyond the press releases that the OEMs share directly. Um, and so I think that's quite important. Um, I suppose I will say, since I serve on a number of different committees, to include World Economic Forum, but also had the opportunity to advise and sit in on decision meetings for Illinois State DOT, Tennessee State DOT, Washington State DOT, City of Miami, City of San Diego. I mean, that's kind of, that's like true bleeding edge. Like, what are those decision makers kind of grappling with? Um, and naturally, right, we're they count on us to not, go out and, shout it from a mountaintop. But in terms of what's, kind of like open source available, those are some great resources. And outside of that, I've been really pleased with when I first was making networking connections. There are quite a few people around the world who are actually very open and generous with their time. Certainly anyone on the call here, or who listens to the recording. Um, yeah, I'd encourage you to do the research on LinkedIn, for example. Identify someone who is already working in the field that you have a particular interest in. I can't promise on their behalf that they'd engage in any kind of like um, ongoing mentorship. But there's quite a few people who are happy to spend 30 minutes to share some of their ideas and insights on that niche segment.
Excellent. And on that advice aspect, I'd like to build with one last question before I open it up to everybody. What specific advice would you give to students who want to advance their skills in this field? What cross-disciplinary knowledge is just an absolute must-have?
Mm, cross-disciplinary. Um, I find the space inherently cross-disciplinary, right? I mean, certainly the computer science, the AI, machine learning is so integral to this. The electrification is core. Um, I I think that the space can still benefit quite a bit from foundational business and economic understanding. Um, and to a large extent, I'll give a shout out to my colleagues at Honeywell, in particular Alison Wyrick. So she led a Honeywell offers an annual Advanced Air Mobility Summit in Washington, D.C. And she hosted a panel that was, I think, what most would consider kind of industry outsiders. But their insights were really, really fascinating. These were psychology and behavioral scientists. Um, and so maybe this kind of brings it full circle, Brent, to your question at the beginning of, what are we seeing as a key difference from, traditional aviation design and business model, in that for a really long time, we didn't have to convince people that aviation had value, right? That it was beneficial. Um, so we haven't had to deal with public acceptance for generations. But we are with new forms of propulsion, and certainly, if you will, new approaches to piloting itself. The matter of public acceptance you could argue is the single most important factor. And so certainly taking a bit of time to study and better understand human psychology, behavioral science, what are the things that people historically and in modern times need to hear to have that assurance. That is quickly becoming, very much $1 million question.
Excellent. Well, with that, I would like to turn over the opportunity for the class now to ask some questions. Seth, I do know you had quite a few on here. Do you want to actually walk through them, or would you prefer I do it?
Oh, I'm not afraid, Dr. T.
There we go. Excellent.
Dan, thank you for being here tonight. I kind of look up to you a little bit, believe it or not. You don't know me or anything like that, but that mentorship thing you just mentioned, cool. Here's my first question, and the reason I'm asking these questions is because I'm going in front of Metro Mayor and the County Mayor of Williamson County before long, and I will be presenting some solutions for AAM initiative and some Counter-UAS possibilities. I've identified a three-part system or three-part process to help safeguard Metro Nashville. against UAS threats, and then at the same time start to build out corridors for the eventual application of UAM and AAM here. Number one is, do you see, and this is my question here, in light of recent threats presented by bad actors with drones, do you see detect and denial systems being the first step towards AAM introduction? Or do you see starting with the vertiports, the vertistops, the heliports as being planning or prevention? Where do you think we should put our eggs first?
Excellent question. It is. It's an excellent question, Seth. You know, there's been one of my first, well, after the Advanced Mobility Institute, one of my first roles, of course, was leading a vertiport company. And while I think it's really beyond question, if we only ever use existing airports, you know,
We're not going to get there.
Well, what was the point? Like, existing
Yeah,
airports,
totally.
you know? So I do acknowledge, at least in the United States, we have, gosh, upwards of 5,000 underutilized local and regional airports that I absolutely agree. I've come to recognize it does make an awful lot of sense to better make use of the existing infrastructure, you know, as we're starting to get underway. But of course, there are plainly no airports that are the true final destination. No one would fly to an airport and say, "Oh, we did it. We made it." Airports are simply, you know, the closest to where you ultimately want to be. So
Yeah.
vertiports sited at you know, meaningful demand destinations, I think are essential. And you know, and they don't have to be, they could, you know, they can be on the entertainment side. I think that, you know,
Yeah.
sports stadiums, golf courses. I mean, there's a
Oh,
lot.
buildings.
Yeah,
The
absolutely.
rooftops of downtown buildings are number one spot for us to start looking.
Zombie malls.
Right, right.
They already have the parking and
Yeah,
yep.
We
exactly.
could brand that. We could brand drones and
Zombie malls.
zombies together. I think we got something. All right. Yeah, I agree that vertiports and heliports and planning that is a major muscle movement. I
Yeah.
mean, it because it develops infrastructure for the rest of the following. Oh, it's got to be done. I'm not going to say done right the first time, but we got to get it as good as possible on the
Yeah.
first go around.
Yeah.
Great. Well, I appreciate you answering that question. Hey, can you talk a little bit? And I'm going to let, there's so many other people that want to ask questions, but in terms of detect and deny systems, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, and there's another element to that first question, I think segues neatly into this. You know, certainly as a military veteran myself, and perhaps you're alluding to the recent news in New Jersey, what's being considered Iranian operated drones throughout the state, which I'm fascinated to see how that you know, how that will be
It's
addressed.
Musk. It's Elon. That's all I got to say. It's Elon. So anyway, yeah, that is in conjunction to what I'm talking about, but that has everyone's up in arms about it, and they should be. I started flying small hovering drones as one of the first pilots in Afghanistan in 2013. I saw the destructive power immediately off the bat when I started flying these things, chasing Taliban around at 25 feet. That was my job. It was fun, but that was what I was doing, and it was new. And I've got to see this develop over the years, and being one of the first operators of this stuff, I immediately knew the destructive power, and I'm shocked it's taken this long for people to start using for nefarious reasons. I'm thankful that we have, but I'm also really annoyed that in the interim, we have not proliferated a detect system across the United States. We're so exposed, and I'm trying to bring that same message to Mayor O'Connell and Mayor Rogers Anderson and a few other mayors and representatives. Marcia's over here, Blackburn. I've got Ogles. I need to put something in front of them with a solution.
Right. Right.
And that's my side project. And that's one of the major reasons why I'm enrolled in this particular master's program, is to help my community deliver something that will safeguard us.
Yeah.
So you talking about this is like my bread and butter. It's like my thing. And I
Yeah.
want to know all the things in the world. And it's not going to happen on this video. I would like to take it offline and let some other people ask some questions. But the detect and denial system, where are we with that?
Yeah. Well, first I'll say, you know, very, very noble effort, Seth, and I'm happy to continue the conversation offline. For the purpose of, you know, this question, it's absolutely vital. I mean, and I agree, we had an enormous head start. You know, the United States has you know, we have some of the most robust, you know, TTPs in the world.
In radar systems in the world. We and the Brits were the ones that invented this stuff in the 40s, 30s.
Right.
Why aren't we ahead of this in 2024? Where's the
Yeah.
manufacturing process that's getting behind metamaterial radar compaction?
Yeah.
That is very, very, very important, that we get these little radar systems that are able to look at tiny little signatures in the sky versus a general aviation aircraft or a Boeing 737. That's fine. That's great. It's not going to work for countering a threat from a little drone this big.
Right. Yeah, and I absolutely agree. We have to invest a lot more money, a lot more resources into getting these systems in the right places, in particular to support our critical infrastructure. What's interesting though, and I think this is very, very important, as much as we're kind of beating the drum with decision makers to invest, I'm not suggesting in any way that we, you know, kind of pull the wool over. But when it comes to broader public acceptance, I think as an industry, we need to be very, very careful about alarming, you know, the general public, and is saying, you know, hey, you know, these enormous threats from bad actors, both external and internal. Because it could very much sour their you know, their interactions moving forward, right? For example, up in Connecticut, this is back when I was in law school. I remember coming across a case in Connecticut where local law enforcement affixed a taser to a drone and then chased down a suspect. And personally, I think there are
innovation. That's a 10.
I mean, what's interesting, you know, I think there's at least an argument that actually has Second Amendment implications, right? If law enforcement are using these devices, weaponized,
Absolutely.
you know, where does that arms race with citizens?
Absolutely.
Well, that led to the prohibition on allowing weapons on these platforms.
Right.
Because I mean, it just opens it up. And I do also, just real quick on this, because I know it ties into AM a little bit, in that the nefarious bad actors are if this continues to proliferate, this is going to be something that AM has to deal with more than perhaps any other operator segment out there other than Rotary.
Yeah. Totally agree.
Seth, I highly recommend going down the rabbit hole of active versus passive engagement. The passive is a lot easier to do from a legal perspective. It's a lot easier to listen and track. It's the active engagement is the part you're going to run into issues with. And you need to kind of see where we're at with that and who has authority within the U.S. national airspace system to legally engage.
Implement. Yeah, working on that. The onion is deep.
Yeah, so interference is active. You can't intentionally caught them here. Yeah, I know it's cool,
Oh, you hit that
cool
on the
stuff.
head.
But yeah, so even
Okay.
the falconry that the Dutch came up with to go out and use a falcon to attack a quad rotor. That's active engagement, and it's intentionally training an animal to engage on your behalf. So it's a rabbit hole, but it's an important thing to start taking a look at. And
Yeah.
know that the government is well aware of this. Jurgen, I'd like to invite you into this conversation because you had some really good comments about CUAS ARC.
Yeah, so I do have some questions, but I'll quickly address this. So one of my roles, I work for a company that supports FAA, and I've been involved in the Counter-UAS stuff, which is what we call Section 383, and that is a part of the 2018 FAA Reauthorization Act, and you can look that up. And what I can tell you is, as of September of last year, they wrapped up the FAA wrapped up vendor selection that took place at 5 airports in the United States. I think like Orlando, Seattle, and there were in one at the Tech Center in New Jersey and 2 others, where they demonstrated vendors could actively search and passively listen for drones flying in a controlled airspace. And they did not have any active denial systems connected with that. They brought their own radar. They brought their own systems to detect. And while I can't go into the methodologies they use, there are some vendors that can detect certain manufacturers by signature. Okay. So, and some of those vendors early on had to leave the demonstration to go to Ukraine. So, but that wrapped up last year. And as part of that testing, one of the system was actually able to catch in New Jersey. If you look up in a news story, he was called the backyard pool bomber. And what he was doing was dropping marine dye, like you saw maybe in the Top Gun movie when they end up in the water with the big green plume where you could see them in the water. He was dumping that in the people's backyard pools and in their in hotel pools in New Jersey. And you can look up the story, and they caught him using assistance from the FAA. The FAA did not tell what that was, but it was part of the demonstration. Tool was on and active, and that's one of the ways they found him. The FAA has a group, Seth, that you may want to interface with. They're called FAA LEAP agents, Law Enforcement Assistance Program. They're underneath what's called ASH, which is the safety and security part of the FAA. If you ever want to reach out to me separately, Seth, I can probably direct you to ASH LEAP agents and that directorate if you ever want to interface with those folks.
Absolutely,
and
Dan.
DJI Aeroscope, as I see in the comments, is one of the tools. But these ones are kind of big boy tools. It takes an actual lift to hoist the mechanism into the air to see all of them. And so they work differently. These radars work differently than traditional ATC radars. So ATC radars are you tune and filter them to get rid of junk. You want to look at airplanes. So that's one of the things that the main differences that you see. They're not attuned to that. There's a lot of trash below 400 feet that you don't necessarily want to look at when you're looking at the aircraft approaching. So
This is one of the reasons I like bringing us all together like this. We can have these conversations, and other folks in the class can start to see who's in what who's in what area and where can we kind of build on.
Yeah,
and Dan, I
and
warn you, we have some ringers in the class. So.
Yeah.
okay. So
Yeah.
so if anyone wants to talk to me about that, please reach out to me on my email. So Dan, what I do work on is I work for a program within the FAA primarily where I support the Lance team that does drone authorization. So I'm the engineering lead for that, and also the
Sweet.
security engineering lead for the new NOTAMs system that's being put in. So And I do a lot of interfacing with rulemaking folks for Part 108, nonconformance monitoring for beyond visual line of sight and AAM. So one of the questions I have is, one of the things that the FAA was looking for from industry, and probably from industry organizations like yours that's supporting it, is the federated network for data. So it doesn't matter if it's a drone, doesn't matter if it's a large drone, say in the new Part 108 rules where they're looking at things over 1,000 pounds, as opposed to small UAS, which are currently right now, we're looking at anything under 55 pounds. But one of the things I'm interested in, this is what I primarily work in. I work in the data exchange. So, and associated with that, and these federated networks that the FAA is looking for industry, there is CFR 47 CFR Part 146 rulemaking, which are UAS service suppliers or UTM providers of service. They're called ADSPs now, the SDSPs. They're coming up with all these different acronyms for these companies, but a lot of them are already out there servicing the UAS community, like ANRA, Airspace Link, Aloft, and those companies, which are leveraging their experience at Lance in order to get to AAM, so we can have these vehicles flying and sharing their data, where they're located at, sort of self-flying, organizing in a way that they don't have to use active air traffic management like we see right now. What sort of way does your group help facilitate companies that want to be these service suppliers? And how are you involved at all, or how is your organization involved at all in helping these companies or organizations determining what sort of networks, the network protocol and data exchanges they are using? Talk to that at all.
So it's an excellent question, Joe. And in this space, from a global perspective, there's still quite a few stakeholders that that are really trying to make a name for themselves, to even to get the necessary recognition about the products and services that they provide. Right. So our efforts at the Advanced Air Mobility Institute as a nonprofit research center, in part involve just doing our part to kind of, scour those open source platforms and bring those folks to the table. We do offer, to an extent, a bit of vetting because there is, unfortunately, quite a few, just kind of phonies, hucksters out there who, if they string together enough, buzzwords and industry nomenclature, then sometimes they're even given time on stage at a trade conference. So our efforts are more on the side of helping new groups who perhaps don't have the resources to put together a dedicated marketing strategy to kind of break in and become a known entity, as well as what kind of leans more towards like a watchdog of sorts, doing our part to help. Again, to the extent that there are those groups who are, they really don't have the team or the necessary talent to like Seth mentioned earlier, a lot of these local efforts, at the municipal level, they really don't know enough otherwise, right, to be able to discern which groups, actually know what they're talking about and can put together the right solutions, to for what they're trying to achieve. So it's to be very clear, our efforts are less about analyzing the hard tech, and more about trying to educate and advocate for the human element, if you will.
Okay, that makes sense. The reason I asked the question is that eventually in the early stages of AAM, it's likely that like if you just take Joby as a platform, for instance, they have a piloted initial version, and then they'll go to a strictly automated version later on. And then you have companies like Whisk who, getting funding from Boeing, they're going to go automated automatically. So you'll have no pilot in the cockpit. So that requires a highly automated and extremely well situated data network to support that vehicle. So that's what I think maybe to refocus my question, if possible, is although you're advocating for an industry based on sort of a renaissance of new vehicles and these novel electric vehicles primarily to reduce sound, bring about a higher level of equity in areas where we didn't have access to airports, lower emissions in order to sort of change the overall economic and environmental impact to those areas. But every bit about this revolves around data exchange. And I'm wondering if at all, maybe a way to express to you then, maybe one of the things that I would suggest is to roll in some sort of tech or some sort of foundation to that. So you have the vehicles, but you also, I think, we need to foster an environment of companies and individuals who have the insights to bring about things like Dr. Terwilliger was saying earlier, and what you mentioned about the company that you were discussing with Flyv, that German-based company, that they take those companies and roll that data exchange and those data networks in there. When you have that, you have the ability to know and distribute that information amongst all the other companies, to FAA regulators, to ICAO operators, to that Chicago convention you talked about when we go over the international borders. And with that, you can also use that information to discriminate what's not supposed to be flying up there. So once you know what's up there, then you can say, okay, well, these drones we're seeing in New Jersey and this counter-UAS conversation we're having earlier, it's like, okay, now we know what's supposed to be there, what's not there, how do we act against those things? So that's kind of, I was wondering maybe, so maybe it's not a question, maybe a statement to you, then I would encourage your organization to not only go to the vehicles, which are kind of the sexy part of doing all this AAM work and how cool they are in the innovation, but also the boring, which is the data and the data exchange, which makes all that stuff, that super fun stuff happen in the background, right? So just take that from a commercial I saw. But sort of, I would encourage that, and I would definitely follow your organization if you were doing that, because that's my sort of the way I make my money. So I make my living. So, but a very interesting talk so far. Thank you for appearing today.
Yeah, absolutely, Joe. Let me speak to that a bit more, if you don't mind, Brent.
Yeah.
Joe, very much appreciate your question, and I think I better understand where you're coming from now. Could not agree more. In terms of both the investment dollars and the industry media attention, it's been almost exclusively the OEMs themselves, the sexy part, if you will. But to really make it work, do we have any shot of safe, efficient integration into our national airspace? Yes, it has to be very, very robust. What in the military we would describe as a common air picture. Where it's vehicle to vehicle communication. It's got to be pretty seamless. I'll say that we are working with a group that's developing low orbit satellites called Trust Point, where they can get resolution down to the centimeter. That's going to be enormously helpful in keeping these vehicles, safely deconflicted. Embraer's the Embraer is backing a group known as Eve Air Mobility, and they're very much that's correct, Seth. Embraer is backing a group called Eve Air Mobility, and they're very much leading the charge in this concept of UAS traffic management. And your point earlier about there's still quite an effort to keep uncrewed aero systems and eVTOLs distinct. To me, it just the definition that we use aligns with NASA's original definition of advanced air mobility in the national blueprint that was published March of 2020. It was always intended to be inclusive of UAS. And there's a couple key reasons. Number one, they're going to be in and around the exact same portions of the airspace, right? So it doesn't make sense to treat them differently from that standpoint. Number two, there's just plainly, and you alluded to this, there's plainly no practical ceiling to how large a UAS can be, and there's also at the same time no practical floor to how small an eVTOL can be. Of course, if the eVTOL is crewed and or carries passengers, there's a natural limit to how small it could be. But outside of that, the lines in terms of size are already starting to blur significantly. And then lastly, and perhaps most importantly, as soon as we reach phase 2, where the pilot is taken out of the flight deck, they will be operated in an almost identical way to what we refer today as uncrewed aerial systems. Right. So for all those reasons, because we expect that the pilot operators will be trained in a very similar way, the vehicles don't have a distinct size differential. They should be introduced into our national airspace under uniform rules.
Excellent. Well, on that, I think we have one last question, and then I think we're gonna call it an evening. And this has been just a great discussion. Excuse me. Victor asked, what do you consider is your Achilles heel in the use of AAM, autonomy or energy? How you leverage this new tech, or how do you leverage this new technology in autonomy and energy?
Gosh, Achilles heel. There's an expression that I hear quite a bit, in this industry, chicken or the egg, in particular, in response to when is the right time to start investing and installing both the landing infrastructure and the charging infrastructure. Yes, of course, it makes total sense that we would, in the event that in the U.S. anyway, that no eVTOLs were type certified, would it have been a waste of time and resources to install a network of electric charging stations? Yeah, I think that's fair. But electric charging stations, we already have eCTOL, conventional takeoff, right? The Pipistrel Vallis Electro is already type certified both by the FAA and EASA. I fully expect that we'll see a flurry of new fully electric aircraft to include eSTOL, short takeoff and landing. Probably the most notable OEM on that front being Electra Aero out of Virginia. They have some really fascinating blown lift technology for anyone who's interested, and they claim that they can consistently take off on less than a regulation soccer field. So that opens the the places from which they could take off and land pretty dramatically. They're going to be a real workhorse in regional air mobility. So we absolutely should be investing in the electric infrastructure well before type certification, number one. But actually, as a prerequisite to that, we need to be taking the time to really study and understand what is the existing grid capacity at all of these various airports. The kind of loads that even a small fleet of electric aircraft would place on a grid is pretty substantial. Fortunately, National Renewable Energies Lab, in concert with NASA, have already begun to engage in a number of energy feasibility studies. Promisingly, there are a number of airports that they reviewed that could support a pretty high tempo of electric aircraft charging today. But if that airport doesn't have a good sense of what they can support today, they can't possibly, budget and allocate the necessary resources, for example, to upgrade to stand up a microgrid, for example. But another key element to all of this is sustainability is an important pillar. We've gained an awful lot of support and momentum from individuals maybe who don't really have a background in aviation at all, but are just very passionate about climate change and reducing carbon footprint. If we aren't honest and transparent about how the electricity is generated, then I think we open ourselves up to claims of greenwashing, right? That it is presented as something that's fantastic and wonderful for the environment, but of course, if the electricity that's utilized and we can accurately claim zero operational emissions, but the generation itself was quite dirty, by burning coal, for example. It's at some point in time, there's going to be, a team of journalists, right, who kind of crack open the case, big expose, and then we've certainly lost public trust. So at the AIM Institute, we're pushing very, very hard to advocate that as we pursue operations that we do our best to also invest in both new and clean generation, and to the extent that we aren't able to, that we at least be honest about it. Right. Any community that, for example, is kind of doing their own calculus and saying, okay, I'm willing to pay a premium to take an electric aircraft or eVTOL, because what they've been told is that it's better for the environment than for example, driving a combustion engine car. Yeah, we do. We have to be very upfront about the real environmental impact. So I would say that's probably the biggest Achilles heel. On the autonomy side, this is a case where, as a pilot myself, I don't know. A part of me doesn't want to believe that an algorithm can be as good or better than our best pilots. But I will say, I've gotten a chance to ride in, some of these self-driving cars, and I've already seen on that side. I genuinely think that they are better than your typical driver. Now, I know, driving and flying, of course, worlds apart, but, when it comes to situational awareness, right? Like Brent, like you alluded to earlier, listen, humans, right? We will always be limited by our field of view, right? And these systems, just head to head on that front, right? Their visual, or their capacity to bring in visual inputs, right? 360 versus, yeah, technically 180 with peripheral, but it's pretty low resolution.
Not to mention parallel processing. So taking those multiple inputs simultaneously at once
Yeah.
feed into their worldview as opposed to ours. We like to think we can multitask, and maybe to a degree we can a little bit,
Yeah.
not anywhere near the capability that a well-produced AI is going to be able to do. So.
Exactly right.
Well, Dan, this has been just a great session. I gotta tell you, I also want to thank everybody that's come together to join us tonight. A major thank you again to Dan for sharing his thoughts and his expertise regarding this technology. This session, I hope it really helped you to better understand the challenges and opportunities associated with the development and rollout of advanced air mobility. Just a quick note for the UNSY 603 students. Remember, for full credit for this activity, you do need to add just a brief entry, either a single text or a video post, by Sunday to our discussion board, identifying that you were in attendance and describing what new information this helped you to understand. I hope to have the recording from this session also uploaded to the Instructor Corner by tomorrow. With that, I'm going to stop recording.